Bill, that was epic. I I couldn't be happier with that one. We got to learn about one of the coolest programs in the whole country, and with such a cool guy, Bob Budd. That was just so much fun.
Aaron, anytime it's a guest like from a place I'm just not that familiar with, I enter these things a little bit nervous. And 3 minutes into this, I'm like, okay, I'm going to love this episode. I'm going to love this conversation. And it was that way all the way through.
It was. So we just talked to Bob Budd. He is the director of the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resources Trust Fund, which is just outrageously cool thing that happens in Wyoming. It's a fund that the state legislature puts money into. It uses the interest to do habitat projects and has touched everywhere across Wyoming. Awesome things: wetlands, forests, rangelands, all kinds of projects that benefited hunters and anglers, river restoration. And the Wyoming legislature just convened on Monday, and they are considering a $75 million investment this year that would almost fully fund the trust fund to the tune of $200 million. It's currently, I think, what did he say, 120 or something. And then that would allow, with the way they use the interest, to dole out about $9 million a year, and each one of those dollars is matched at 5.6 times. So doing the easy math, we're talking $50 million worth of impact across the landscape in Wyoming every year. So just really incredible.
And as we know, conservation isn't cheap, but it has to be funded and done, and they do a fabulous job of it, obviously. But hey, for people in other places, aside from hearing their story and how they got this done and how they're continuing to get it done and grow it, listening to Bob's attitude about working with different groups of people, some of whom a lot of times you think would be counter to each other or start off button heads, and man, he has such a way of cutting the chase and bringing people together. It's phenomenal to listen to it. So I'd encourage people to, even just with that in mind, pay attention to what he says.
Yeah, there's so many cool lessons in collaboration and civility and treating one another right and getting things done together and making things work. And man, I think we could have talked to Bob for hours and hours. He's a busy guy. That short session in the state legislature, he's down there every day. We also got to mention Camo at the Capitol, which is happening in Wyoming next week, that the Federation is proud of and helping work, in multiple different states. So just a really cool episode. With my Wyoming history too, I couldn't help but just be giddy about some of the cool places he talked about.
Oh, I'm sure, man. That's where you grew up. That's. I think of some of the rivers that I knew as a child that are in worse shape than they ever were, and to know a place where you had some childhood memories is now this pristine 30-inch trout. Good grief, man.
Yeah, I remember that river being just really rough. It was in the middle of Casper, and it had been, mistreated for many years, and what a cool resource now. But anyway, we'll let folks go. We just wanted to give you a little bit of excitement there for this episode. Jump on, listen to it, listen to Bob, enjoy it. It's fun. And then if you're in Wyoming, or even if you're not, call those legislators. Tell them to fund this baby. It's worth it. It's a national treasure. Where they're doing federal lands, private lands, helping really amazing wildlife herds, fish, all kinds of things. So enjoy the episode, folks. Since 1936, the National Wildlife Federation has worked with hunters and anglers to pass the most important conservation laws in American history and to protect our sporting traditions. This podcast explores our history, our values, and the work we do to safeguard the fish and wildlife that fuel our passions. We are NWF Outdoors. Welcome, folks, to the NWF Outdoors podcast. This is your host, Aaron Kindle. I'm here with my regular co-host, Bill Cooksey. What's happening, buddy?
Oh, it's all good here in Tennessee. I just don't know if it's spring, summer, or fall right now. The weather's crazy.
Yeah, we're experiencing a little bit of that in Colorado. Some pretty big swings, snowstorm, then 50 degrees and back and forth and snow melting and going. But it's almost that good time. The blue-winged olive will be coming off in the river here in the next month or so, and I'll be back to fishing season. So I'm looking forward to it. Today we have a really cool guest. I think I've known him a little bit here and there over the handful of years that I've been working in Wyoming. And Bob, I should also say, we both were raised partly in Fremont County. I grew up in Riverton partly, and so we have some shared history there. But I want to introduce Bob Budd today, and he's the guy who's running. Well, that's a good sign. He's got a duck call for his phone since he hasn't muted it. But I'll introduce him as he's dealing with that. Bob Budd, he's a fifth generation Wyomingite, and he's got some degrees in animal science and agriculture and range management. And he's worked kind of all over the state doing multiple different things. The Wyoming Stock Growers Association. He's managed ranches for the Nature Conservancy. And now he's the director of the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resources Trust. And that's what we're really here to talk about in a lot of ways. So welcome, Bob, and thanks for coming.
Oh, great to be with you. Our weather's a little the same. We don't know what it is. Yesterday it was 50 degrees and today it's snowing. So bring it on.
Yep. Life in the West. For us, Bill, if you don't know, we watch the storms come and then we watch them go, and it's sunny in between and not a lot of cloudy and hanging around in the middle. So we like that.
Gotcha. Yeah, we've had some 20-degree nights in the last 4 or 5 days, and today it's almost 70. So,
well, we're in the doldrums of very few hunting seasons, and fishing hasn't quite kicked up yet. So it's a good time to have this conversation because, as folks may know, most state legislatures who have a session are in session right now. And Wyoming's just kicked off here on Monday. And we wanted to bring Bob in to talk about a unique opportunity this year. Wyoming is in a budget session. It's only a 20-day session, so a lot happens fast. I've heard, Bob, and you can verify this, we're looking at maybe something like 500 bills in about 20 days. So you can verify that, but that's a heck of a lot going on. But
yeah, they've thinned them out pretty well. They have to have a 2/3 vote to be introduced unless they're a budget related, and they've been knocking them in the head pretty hard. So we'll probably end up with around 200 to deal with. Hopefully, maybe even less than that. But it's still a lot to do in 20 days, as you can imagine.
Sure. There's a couple we're watching there. Obviously, there's some sage grouse stuff. There's this bill, a couple of other ones. But Bob, what we usually do is ask folks just what they've been doing outside lately to start things off, because this is the NWF Outdoors podcast. We like talking about the outdoors. So we'll start it out with you. What you been up to lately? You getting outside at all?
Well, a little bit here and there, but there's not a lot going on. Like you said, the hunting seasons are over, and I'm not an ice fisherman. So if you get out, mainly it's walking, hiking, just getting out in the country. It's been kind of a weird year for us this year. Normally, we've got a place at Glendo, Wyoming, and normally we watch birds all day long because we've got thousands of them. And this year it's pretty slim. So we're trying to figure out whether they decided they were really going to get winter and boogied south, or whether it was nice enough early that they didn't show up. But that's kind of been it lately. And again, like you say, with the weather the way it is, one day you can go out and hike in a T-shirt and shorts, and the next day you're huddled in front of the fire because it's 20 below zero. So kind of an oddball year.
Yeah, we know it well. Well, I'm glad you're getting out at least some in the middle of all this busy stuff. Bill, what about you? You finding any time outside lately?
yeah, I mean, Saturday was the last youth waterfowl hunt in Tennessee, so we got a couple of kids out. They had a ball. 2 kids shot 4 boxes of shells and went home with 5 ducks. So the shooting wasn't stellar, but that's kind of what you expect on youth hunts. And they had a ball, got all their stuff picked up, and now it's on to scouting turkeys and trying to catch a few crappie.
Well, that sounds pretty good. I like that. I haven't been doing too much outside myself either. It's just that time of year, right? I did wet my line in the river the other day for the first time in 4 or 5 months, but caught 1 fish. Wasn't very productive, but better than sitting at home. I'll tell you that. I always like it no matter what. So anyway,
and it's not a skunk. Not a skunk.
It's not a skunk. Anyway, let's jump into this. And Bob, I thought we'd start a little bit with just Your personal background's pretty interesting. You've got everything from managing ranches to range management. I didn't mention to folks that, you've been president of the International Society for Range Management, the Wyoming chapter of the Wildlife Society. Long history of lots of different professional things and personal background. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about who you are and how you came up to this moment leading the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resources Trust Fund?
Well, sure. I think I'm a prototypical Wyoming kid, grew up in the 60s and 70s, and every opportunity you had, you were out doing something. Used to fish for ling in the winter on Ocean Lake, and we'd rock hound and scout for hunting in all over the state. Family settled the town of Big Piney in 1879, so that's always been kind of home country for me, and just automatically tied to the outdoors. In fact, have a new book coming out this year called Otter's Dance that's about those experiences and the interface between particularly agriculture and wildlife. And those were my two passions. And I worked for the Wyoming Stock Growers for 15 years, and obviously promoting conservation and ranching and open space. And then had an opportunity to go manage a ranch in Lander for the Nature Conservancy and raise my kids there, which was phenomenal. Red Canyon, it's a landmark in Wyoming, and lived there for 12 years, did that. And then this job came up, and it was created, the trust was created in 2005. And it was such a crossover with all the things I'd done. I mean, I'd been a guide, I'd worked in the oil field, I'd been a ranch hand and managed a ranch, worked for a nonprofit. All those things just kind of came together, and I applied for the job and was selected, and have been there since. So I like I say, I think I'm a pretty typical Wyoming or Western kid. Grew up with a deep reverence for the outdoors and for the people who take care of it, and always wanted to be a part of that. And now, wow, with the trust, we can be a part of that in such a big way and such an important way that it's just kind of a dream job.
Thanks for that. That's pretty awesome. I have been at that ranch too, that you took care of there. I was did the Ruckelshaus Institute collaborative natural resource decision making. I can't remember exactly how you called it, negotiation program. It was a year-long program. We did some of our courses there at that ranch. That's a really awesome place. So anyway, thanks for the stewardship there. Let's jump into the Natural Resource Trust Fund. I think it's unique. Not a lot of states have something like this. If you could just kind of start us out, like how it got started, what it's supposed to do, what you do on a day-to-day basis, and then we'll get into, the unique opportunity we're looking at this year.
You bet. So the idea came up in the middle 1980s, and what was proposed then was to create a fund of $250 million that the investment return could be used for habitat and other things. The fatal flaw at that time was that it was housed totally within the Wildlife Agency. And as anybody who's been in the West or anywhere knows, that created suspicion and aroused ire in some circles, and they were like, we're not going to give that there. But then Governor Dave Friedenthal was elected, and he brought the idea back up in 04 and 05 and said, let's figure out how to do this. And of course, we've learned to work together a lot better out here than we did 30 years ago, and got a bunch of groups together and said, how would you build it? And the biggest change was that I have a board of 9 members. It's an independent board. They're completely apolitical. I've got 3 of the 9 have been on since the trust was created in 05. And then we have people rotate in. We've got age distribution from the late 20s, early 30s to late 70s. It's people who have passion. They come out of all the judicial districts, and that's who makes the decisions. And so it's open to anybody to apply for projects. Individuals can't, but conservation districts, big partner. We work with the Game and Fish Department. We work with all the federal agencies. We work with a ton of NGOs. and right down to local governments. We've got projects in this year with a kind of a collaborative out of Northeast Wyoming to do healthy forest work. We've got another big project, the town of Green River, to rebuild the river through there. So it goes across the board, but probably the biggest thing people ask, what's the best project you ever had? And the list is too long. We've done over 1,000 of them in that time period. But the biggest thing I think that the trust has done is it's brought people from disparate backgrounds together with a common purpose, whether it's the encampment river or it's a rangeland situation for mule deer or sage grouse, highway crossings for mule deer down at Bags. It galvanizes communities to find common ground and do things that are beneficial to all. And that's been the most gratifying piece of this, is looking at people that have sat in the cab of my truck and told me what a no good SOB what the other one was. And then you go down the road with the other one. And now we're all three sitting in the cab and they're arguing over who's going to get the gate. So it's been awesome. Phenomenal in that regard. And I think it's led to success with other things in our state. If you look at what we've done with sage grouse, if you look at the way we've handled migration corridors, it's been done the same way because now that's how we do things. So that's probably, I think, the biggest thing about the Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust is its ability to bring people together and find common ground.
That's excellent.
Bob, I was fascinated by this when Aaron first brought it up, because I'm from a state where our Wildlife Resources Agency depends totally on hunters and fishermen for dollars. And, the local organizations are all scrambling, trying to find ways to fund work, as is our resources agency. So I'd love to hear more about your structure and how this works, because it just seems like a phenomenal program that could be beneficial so many places.
Yeah, and Bill, it's not a whole lot different than the Tennessee Wildlife Resource Foundation. I said when I was out there last spring, I had a good chance to visit with Johnny and how they do things. The difference is that we are a government entity, and as such, have had access to, when times were good in the oil patch and in the coal mines, we had some excess money. They put that into the trust, slowly built it up. The legislature has been very, very good about adding money for things that were critical. They've added money the last few years for migration, mule deer migration primarily, but also for invasive species management and that sort of thing. The difference between us and some other that are similar is that we have the trust account, so we have the ability to generate revenue and aren't totally dependent on the budget each year. Obviously, that's marginal, or we're hoping to make it a whole lot better coming up here in the next month or so. But that's an advantage we have. And the other is that we're really habitat focused. We do a little bit of research. We do a few other things. But it better be habitat based, and it better be something that's beneficial to water quality, wildlife, air quality, land quality, that component. And so we don't drift over into city parks and education programs. The work we do is on the ground. You can go out and stand on it, look at it, see what it did. You can see a river that's been restored and see where you've got habitat for fish. You can see a wetland that's built. One of my favorites is out in the middle of the desert. And now it's getting up to where it's almost 1,200 acres of wetland and associated habitat, hundreds of bird species. Phenomenal. In the fall and the spring, the sky is just black with all these different birds that people tell you, well, they don't exist in Wyoming. And I drive them over to Bags and go, there they are right there. So, but I think that habitat focus is really, really important.
That's awesome, Bob. Tell us, so, do you guys actively seek these projects? Do folks come to you? Is it the Fish and Game? Walk us through, kind of the cradle part of the process where you get these projects and then you take them to completion.
Yeah. So when we started out, we kind of had that mentality I talked about, that we were habitat focused, results focused. And we had to go out. Everybody, of course, was excited about the trust being created. So they were aware that it was there. Our biggest job early on was getting out to them and saying, all right, you got a wish list, whether you're the Wildlife Federation or you're the Game and Fish Department or the BLM office in Kemmer, there are things you'd like to do. We created an application form that's pretty user friendly, and said, tell us what you got. So off the bat, we got, I think, 88 projects that were submitted. About half of those were pretty good and the others were not. The success rate the first year was around 50%, whether it got funded or not. We're now running about 85% of what we get in is funded. And that's, 15 years of doing it. Your clientele understands what you're looking for and you understand them. So we both actively seek projects, but we don't have to. Just before we got on today, I got 2 applications in. Those aren't due till the end of the month, and they're coming in. One of them's a wetland, and the other one is a prescribed burn for to create aspen habitat and enhance mule deer habitat. And so you kind of drop. We have about 10 areas that we primarily fund. One of those is miscellaneous, but the others are all pretty straightforward. And in the world of conservation, one thing that you'll find is that there are kind of peaks and valleys and cyclic natures to what people are excited about. Early on, we had lots and lots of wetland projects. It's easy, it's low-hanging fruit, it's proven. We had a ton of those come in. Well, now that's a steady. We get probably 5 or 6 of those each funding cycle. And what's really hot now is river restoration. Early on, it was wetlands and prescribed fire and aspen treatments. Still do all that, but you'll have peaks and valleys. In the middle of probably about 2013, somewhere in there, with the sage grouse stuff, conservation easements were a big deal. We did a ton of them in sage grouse core areas and in prime habitat. So you have that ebb and flow all the time. But underneath that, you have a steady, constant a lift that's going on the landscape that is really, really cool.
Tell me more about the conservation easements. When you say you did them, does that mean you did some projects on easements, or you actually, executed an agreement for an easement?
We funded them. What we do, the beauty of this program is we got partners who do all the really hard work and we pay for it. And they can't do their hard work without our money, and we can't fund it without their hard work. So, we've got groups like Trout Unlimited. They've got a constant. They know exactly what rivers they're working on and which phases. We've got complete watershed plans that people come in with. About the second time you get a project on the same river or creek, you go, okay, what are we going to do here, guys? Then they come in with the full picture. And so, we've done projects there where our contribution is $2 million, $3-4 million over 5 years or so. And you take a river and you add back the historic floodplain wetlands, that kind of thing. It's phenomenal.
You've touched on this a little bit several times, but it seems like y'all work with a whole lot of different folks, a lot of different agencies, organizations, and groups. How many applicants do y'all normally get, and from how many different groups, orgs, and agencies do y'all work with in a given year?
So we've had applications to date from right at 150 different organizations. And we get, it depends on the year. Last year was down a little bit, but you had COVID, and all that going on. Normally we'll get about 60 to 80 applications a year. We have 2 funding periods, spring and fall. And we pride ourselves on being able to crank through those in about 3 months and get those contracts written and the project stood up and going. And the beauty of doing it twice a year, Bill, is that if somebody comes in with something and it isn't quite there, maybe they don't have all their permits in place, or they don't have their matching funds, or they're missing a key partner landowner, we can go back to them and say, hey, we'll come out with you in the interim and we'll help get this to where it's fundable. We're trying to get to yes. We're trying to get the project done on the ground, as opposed to just taking in paper applications and saying yes, no, maybe. I mean, we want to fund the program. And that's one of the things that I think is unique about us. Every project that we do, we look at on the ground. We go out every single application that is advanced two of us usually, and sometimes more, either two board members, myself and a board member, will go out. We look at the project. It's a grilling. It's a grind for the applicant, because we're going through their budget, their permitting, their design. I mean, you're looking at 90% designs from their engineers. You're looking at all of that stuff, evaluating it, and then coming back and deciding whether or not you're going to fund it, partially fund it, or not fund it. But the idea is always, if they've got a germ of an idea and they've got that local buy-in and they've got commitment, then we want to get them to where they're doing the project. Now, that 150 agencies or 150 applicants is scratching the surface, because if you take an application, a rangeland enhancement, maybe it's a conifer removal or a juniper treatment or something, on top of that, then you'll have 30 or 40 landowners. So you got one applicant that's a conservation district, and coupled up with that, you've got 30 landowners, and you've got the local DU chapter, and you've got, so it expands out from that. But we've actually had applications from right at 150 different entities.
I love this program, Bob. I couldn't love it too much more. And just even what you just said, right? It's kind of like a compounding effect. It's like you get one person engaged, and then they spread it out. And the other thing it does, it makes all these cool networks and connections, and just incites more collaboration. It's really beautiful in that way.
And I tell people all the time, money's kind of like, the stuff that draws flies. And so we actually are able to leverage every dollar we spend right now 5.6 times. So for every dollar the state of Wyoming puts into a project, we're getting $5.60 additionally from other sources. And that's groups like your own. That's, that's school kids. It's the NGOs you always think of, but it's other entities as well. And that just lets our money go further and get more done.
Howdy, listeners. For more great content, check out NWF Outdoors social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Connect with us. We want to hear from you. Send us your ideas for podcast guests and questions in the comments.
And for even more excellent content, here's a message from our partner podcast.
Hey everyone, this is Marcia Brownlee from Artemis Sportswomen. We know you love awesome stories about hunting, fishing, and conservation, so head on over to the Artemis podcast. You'll meet adventurous, accomplished women who are redefining conservation through their lives in the field and on the water. Filled with humor, audacity, empathy, and intelligence, Artemis brings you new voices and introduces you to women from all walks of the sporting community. Find Artemis wherever you get your podcasts.
I got to do one other thing too, because you mentioned Trout Unlimited, and it reminded me of a couple people that are there. I used to work for Trout Unlimited, and I know Kathy Purvis was one of the original people. She was working at Wyoming Wildlife Federation at the time. She's at Trout Unlimited now, and she was instrumental in helping get this program started, as Wyoming Wildlife Federation has been and been in on this. Maybe you can talk a little bit about WWF's history here.
Yeah, you bet. And I can talk about Kathy's history too. We went to college together. We've been friends for a long time. She used to be my dancing partner at the bar called Snorts in Laramie. So, and she was a pioneer, great dancer, by the way, but really did a lot and helped get the trust going, helped get TU stood up in Wyoming. The Federation has really evolved in Wyoming in a way that I'm very, very happy to see. And you got to remember, I started my career as a lobbyist for the cattlemen, and WWF and what WSGA were not on the same page very damned often. And if we were, it was kind of scary. That's very different now. And I think that's because people have become less focused on litigation and less focused on controversy. I'm excluding Congress from this conversation, I'm talking about real people out here in the West. But we're looking at habitat. We're looking at what's the greater good. It's not only what's good for deer, it's what's good for the landowner that's hosting the deer during those critical seasons of the year. And it's not just what's good for that rancher and his cows, it's what's good for the elk or the moose that live on his place. And people in Wyoming see that. And I think that evolution of WWF has been phenomenal. Have a tremendous working relationship with them now, and with Joy Jesse and all the folks out here, very supportive and like I say, focused on the right things, focused on commonalities, focused on things that we can get done that make things better. And yeah, there are going to be those places where people have a disagreement. Not everybody is going to be on the same page. Let those fall where they may, but don't lose sight of the commonality we have, because probably 80% of it's common, and the 20 is not worth losing the 80 over.
I'm loving this. I mean, I want to find a reason for Vanishing Paradise now to do something in Wyoming, so that I can work with you, because
I'd love it.
Y'all seem like just such an awesome funder to work with, to get things done. Obviously, sometimes that's not always a perfect scenario, but it sounds awesome. So how, and this is probably pretty obvious to you, but for somebody from Tennessee, how has your program helped hunters specifically?
Well, if you look at it, we've actually done a couple of things where we've helped do contracts that allowed for access, which I think is really the absolute best way to do it. You got a willing landowner who says, hey, I'm going to have some impacts. I'm willing to do it for this amount per year, allow people to access public lands or their own. It's their choice. It's not forced on them. It's a free market deal. We did that over in Albany County, and it's been incredibly successful to get some elk harvested where they were over objective, and to get hunters out where they could access, particularly for people who are hunting cows for meat, but others as well. I think the biggest thing that we do for hunters and anglers is, if you take a river that's marginally functional because it's been, over time it's been engineered, or we've cut off the oxbows, or we've lost the juvenile fish rearing areas, or we've lost calving grounds for elk, or we've lost the crucial winter for bighorn sheep. What we really are trying to do is make that habitat as optimal as we can. And if you've got good habitat, your populations are going to do better. And looking at mule deer migration as an example, if we've got landowners who can understand what to do to make those stopover areas better to fatten those deer going into winter, if we've got people who understand that there are bottlenecks in areas that we don't want to have activity in for a short period of time, that benefits, because if those deer go into the winter fatter, they have healthier fawns. They come back in the spring, and they're able to get up and go and follow the green line up. Those are the kind of things that we can do. And beyond that, we've got a tremendous wildlife agency in Wyoming. They manage the deer, they manage the elk, they manage the fish, and do a good job of it. We just make sure they've got a place to go out and make a living. And I think that's the marriage that I love in with a range background. I mean, all my work is in wildlife habitat, but I'm not a population biologist. If you came and asked me to tell you how populations of wildlife work, hell, I'll tell you how to rebuild something else first that I don't know anything about. That's not my deal. I just provide the groceries. We find the habitat. And you look at what happens on, for instance, the river through Casper, Wyoming is a blue ribbon trout fishery. They're catching 30-inch rainbows in there, in town. And that used to be refrigerators, blocks of concrete, whatever you could throw in the river. But we went back in and we put $2 million into that. They rebuilt that river. They got the stream to function like it's supposed to. You got deep pools that'll hold those fish when it's hot in the summer. You got, that river's functioning like it should. That, the obvious benefit to anglers on that is you got more fish, they're healthier, they're fatter, and they're wild fish. You're not having to stock it. They're there, they're propagating. So that's how I think it directly affects hunters and fishermen.
Bob, I remember those days in Casper in the 80s when I was a kid. That was a rough looking river at times.
Oh, man.
Let's give you an opportunity right before we really get into this unique opportunity we have now to tell us just a unique story about this, because I can imagine over the years you've seen, and I mean, you're already telling us about a lot of it, you've seen and witnessed some really cool stories, wildlife wise. Everybody loves a good story. And I know I'm putting you on the spot a little bit there, but I can imagine you have so many, it's not going to be that hard. And then we'll jump into our unique opportunity.
Well, it is hard because I have so many. And I just think about what a phenomenal state I live in. And I mean, it's just unbelievable. And I had a board member early on who, born and raised in California, ballerina, fabulous board member, but town girl all the way. And so we took off one day to do a bunch of site visits, and I got to Rawlins. We're driving down the interstate and talking and getting to know each other a little bit because it was pretty early on. And I cut off and went south and hit this dirt road. And she said, "Where are we going?" And I said, "Well, we're going to go over to Baggs." And she said, "Well, don't you just go down to Creston Junction and down the highway?" And I said, "No, we're not going that way." And we started up over the top. And as soon as we crested the hill, here's all these deer, does and fawns, and then just bounding out of the sagebrush. And her eyes are getting pretty big. We get up on top, and there's a herd of elk that comes across the road. You've got sage chickens. You got all kinds of species, songbirds and everything just bursting out, drop down into Baggs, look at these projects, and then looped back over Battle Mountain, came back through Saratoga. We weren't on a main road the entire day. We got back, and I dropped her off, and she said, "I had no idea this state was this state." And I had another one who he was curious about Shirley Basin, and I said, "Well, why don't you do that site visit with me?" It's his favorite place in the whole world, and it's the off the beaten path. My favorite stories involve people and them seeing things, and a fisherman, you going out to a rancher and having him come up and say, "Hey, yeah, those are my cows. That's the horses. Here, I got to go show you this pond because I got a bunch of green-winged teal on there, and they got chicks or ducklings, and that magic. It's like little kids in school, and you feel it. That's the stuff. And as far as the biological part, that's kind of that's the easy part. I mean, you go burn something and you see the aspens come back in, you see creeks start running that haven't run in 40 years, and you're standing there. The landowner says, "I've never seen water in that creek, and I've lived here 60 years. Yeah, that's compelling. But it's the human dynamic, the everybody all in together thing, standing in the middle of a freezing ass cold creek, all of you, because you're so excited about seeing what the fish are doing. It's just, that's it.
Yeah. This is amazing because I'm sitting here watching Aaron, and we're both grinning and shaking our heads, listening to how, I mean, you're so sincere and you're so excited about all this work. And that's always a real treat, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
I think whenever we get around that, it helps all of us. Y'all have done a ton of work despite being partially funded all this time. And now I understand there's a possibility of getting fully funded. Tell us about that and how things are looking.
Yeah, well, I'm a money guy. You're never fully funded, right? But in 2005, when they passed the law said that the fund should have a minimum of $200 million. And right now we're at 115. Our governor and our appropriations committee in our budget right now have added another $75 million to go into the corpus of the trust. It's phenomenal. It's incredibly humbling, and we hope we can hold that. Right now that would get us at 190. 190 million out of the 200 to get there. That's a big deal. That'll help us generate on order of probably 7 to 10 million a year, which is where we'd like to be. We think that's about what we can handle. That's about the match that we can generate. And so that's where we are today. Had great hearings with all of them. Governor Gordon's been a tremendous supporter. He actually served on my board for 2 years before he became treasurer and had to resign. And he and I have been friends for a long time, and through ranching circles and wildlife stuff. But he put it in as a priority, and that went through the appropriations process. So that's very, very humbling, like I say, but it's also inspiring that the people in this state value their outdoors. They value wildlife. They value open space, and they're willing to commit to that. And we're hoping to come through the session with that 75 intact and just go on to more, bigger, better things.
So, Bob, unpack that a little bit more, because I think there's some stuff there that maybe folks are going, what does that mean exactly? But one of the unique things about the trust is that you utilize the interest from this fund to continue to, perpetually do these projects. Can you talk about a little bit more how that works?
Yeah, so the fund is essentially what's called an inviolate fund. It means it can't be used for other purposes. Its total purpose is to fund habitat improvement projects and natural resource enhancement projects. And so a few years ago, there was a constitutional amendment to allow some of these funds to be invested in higher earning, higher yielding stocks, bonds, and not just absolute safe, 2% stuff. We are in that pool. We were kind of the poster child for why to do that. There's a bill in this year to allow Game and Fish to do it with their reserves as well. And so we generate interest or yield on those funds. That money is what we use to fund projects. And, we'll earn this year, looks like we're going to earn right at $8.5 million. And market's been pretty crazy good. So that would be money that's available to do projects with. And then you take that, and remember, it's going to get quintupled. So, that 8 million becomes 40 million. And that's money out on the ground. That's where I think the big bang for the buck comes in. But the 75 would get us up to 190. If you can do the math yourself, if you're earning 5%, that's, what is that, 9 million a year. That's pretty decent. And that will go a long way. One of the things that it'll allow us to do too is be a little bit less concerned, and not concerned maybe, but less dependent on matching funds. So the board has never been constrained by that. I mean, we fund things at 80%, we fund them at 10%. It depends a lot on what they are and what the resources people have are. Every project is evaluated on its own merits, and that's a beautiful thing about the way that my board operates. They're sharp, they're good, they do this and they get it. And so, it'll allow us to expand. And maybe as an example, where right now we've got a project that we're in our large project bill that goes to the legislature to add $400,000 in Northeast Wyoming on our end for Healthy Forest Initiative, and to take undergrowth out from underneath the ponderosa pine forest and get it restored to what it should be. And that'll benefit mule deer, whitetail, turkey, a ton of neotropicals that use the Black Hills. If we have the ability to do that at 400, if we're double, we may be able to do double the acres, and we can double the match. We can just expand what we do. A lot of what we do is landscape based, and we don't like random acts of conservation. I mean, that's great, but if you're one landowner out of 10 and you're doing something and the other 9 aren't with you, that isn't the same. And when you can go look at an entire watershed like the one I grew up in and say, you know what, there's a conservation easement on every ranch in that valley, every ranch, and it's going to stay intact, an entire watershed. And then you're starting to add to that by restoring the river, and you're doing range improvements, and you're doing aspen regeneration and all that. That's the magic. And oh man, that's what we want to do. So, more money, more acres, more projects, more miles of stream. That's what it comes down to.
Man, we need your passion everywhere. That's just, I love it. It's just kind of flowing out of you, right? You just love this stuff so much. You love the landscapes. I really can't get enough of that, Bob. I could sit here and talk to you for a while just hearing that.
I could do it all day. And the best part, and people just finally, they quit going with me anymore, because I said, get in the pickup, we'll go for a drive. after about 5 or 6 days, they say, I need to call my wife or I need to tell my husband where I'm at. But it's a huge state. And that,
Yeah.
Aaron. I mean, it's so different. The Black Hills are completely different than the Bighorns, and they're completely different than the Absarokas, and they all need different things. But you can get. I get in the truck. I did it with a senator one time. He was the chairman of the travel committee, and he said, I need to see what you do. And we were both going to a meeting in Lander, and I said, well, get in, you can ride with me. We drove. It's a 4-hour drive. We never were out of sight of a project we'd done. We pulled off the road, and I'd say, well, we did that prescribed fire. We put that water development in. We fixed that fence so antelope can get under it. And we did that for 300 miles, and it was nonstop. He got out of the truck and looked at somebody and said, geez, if you're going to ride with him, make sure he's got plenty of water because he won't shut up. But it's that cool. It's just freaking awesome.
Well, I want to go ride with you. We've never ridden together. I want to go ride with you.
Do it.
And you keep talking about places that I know and I grew up around and I love. So I love it even more because I know you're taking care of places that are near and dear to me. Let's ask one more question on this fund before maybe we try to wrap up here pretty soon. But mechanically, what has to happen now as far as, okay, so it's sitting, the governor's budget had it in there. It's in the legislature. What do they do now? And perhaps maybe you can add too, is there things that, sportsmen and women, other wildlife advocates can be telling their legislators or thinking about right now?
Well, it has to pass the House and the Senate. The number needs to be the same, and hopefully that will happen. And then it needs to be signed by the governor. So that's where we're at. It's pretty simple legislation. Now, you say simple, we're on day 3 of the legislature and they're already mad at each other. So you kind of hope to avoid that. But that's all we just need to get it through this budget session. And then, the wheels turn, the money gets moved. We go on about what we do. The biggest thing I think that sportsmen can do and people who care about the outdoors is just let their legislator know that they support the funding of the trust. And that's really all it comes down to. We don't want to beat them up over it. We don't want to badger them. I mean, there's going to be people who vote no. We know that. There are people who don't like what we do. We know that. They aren't the majority. But I think just letting your legislator know, hey, this is a good thing and we'd like you to fund it. That's all they need to do.
Good stuff. I have to ask again, and we touched on Tennessee earlier, with all you've learned over the years, what could other states learn from y'all?
I think other states are in a very similar place to us. The one thing that we have, advantage that we have, is a low number of people. And we're not a big enough state and big enough communities that you can burn your bridges right and left, because pretty soon there's no bridges left. And so civility, I think that's a big, big thing. I love, Bill, when I was in Tennessee, I loved it. I liked the people. They reminded me of Wyoming people. And that's true when I was in Texas. It's true when I was in New Mexico. I've worked in, all these states. When it gets right down to it and you're out there kicking the dirt and you're all thinking the same. And we need to get to where that's what we do in the morning and that's what we do at night, is go, this was a great day. It snowed like a son of a bitch, but out in the middle of it, here comes a bunch of birds I hadn't seen, or I saw, my big thrill when I came down there turkey hunting, where there was no turkeys, the only place in Tennessee there weren't any turkeys, but I saw cardinals all over the place. We don't get those here. That was so cool. I just sat there and the guide said, what are you doing? And I said, there's cardinals over there in that tree. He said, there's cardinals everywhere. And I said, well, not where I'm from. Just leave me alone a minute. That magic, that's what it is. I mean, look in the eyes of a child and say, what's the wonder there? Because if you lose the wonder, what's left? That's what it's all about. And being outdoors, being somewhere where you hear things that you don't hear in town, and being able to go, oh yeah, well, geese are flying higher this morning. I wonder what's going on. You just musing about things you'll never know. that's what I think we've got, is we have the ability to find a common beauty in the outdoors. And I think we all need to realize that. And I'm worried about losing that. I'm worried about people wanting it so much that they eat it all up. And we got, 20 acres here and 20 acres there. And then pretty soon we don't have anything left. And, but yeah, I think I think what people can learn from us is what we learn from them, is that there's a commonality, and we really need to start our day and end our day asking ourselves, what do I have in common with everybody else? And here, clean air, clean water, wildlife, open space. I think that's something we all value.
Bob, I just can't get enough, man. I really can't. Your passion for it, your collaborative spirit, the way you use wildlife in these places to connect people. I mean, that's really what it's all about in conservation. I think despite you saying many states do this, I think there's still a lot to be learned, because I think Wyoming does it in a special way that I think you all should be really proud of. And clearly you're an excellent emissary and ambassador for that, because we need that passion in our world of conservation.
Oh, we do. And we are proud of that in Wyoming, as you know. I mean, the things we've done, and we talk about it, our sage grouse plan, we started that long before we needed to, and look at, how that went. And I mean, that at the time we did that, I remember Governor Friedenthal, we went in, and Ryan Lance and I, and said, we think we ought to put a group together that has oil and gas and mining and ranching and conservation groups and all the federal agencies and the state agencies, and sort this out and come up with a plan. And he said, you guys have lost your minds. But if it doesn't work, I'm firing you. And if it does, I'm taking credit. So he's still taking credit. But, black-footed ferrets, the recovery of that species, things we're doing. We've done tons of work with trumpeter swans, the migration stuff. How do you not get together on things like that? How do you, and the reality is you do. Oil and gas industry has done tremendous things for wildlife, because we were able to sit down and say, hey, here's Wildlife 101. This is what they need. And they were able to sit down and say, yeah, well, here's Oil and Gas 101. This is what we need. And when you do that, then you find ways to make it work. If you just do it in the courtroom, or you're trying to do it on Facebook or something like that, you're talking past each other. You're sitting at the same table, drinking the same pitcher of beer. You find a lot of common ground.
You're speaking the gospel, man. I love it. I should mention too, we have an event Wyoming Wildlife Federation does next week, Camo at the Capitol, and this is kind of exactly what we're talking about here, right? Take your passion, bring it to legislators, tell them what you care about. Lots of the sportsmen's organizations will be there. You get the opportunity to go and learn how to talk with legislators and hear about some of the issues, and then head on over to the Capitol and start talking to them. These folks are, public servants. They're there to serve the people and to help move things forward, like you're talking about, Bob. And, we know Wyomingites care about wildlife. And so let's go advocate for that.
Camo at the Capitol. It's a great event every year, and they have a nice reception at the end of the day. And I've been fortunate enough to take part in that every year since they've done it, and really enjoy that opportunity. Again, Jesse and Joy and all the folks at WWF do a tremendous job pulling all that together, and they've got a team of them that do it. And it's a great event. It's a great day, and I think it's a really positive thing for conservation and for groups like WWF and others.
Good. Yeah. And I'll toot my own horn a little bit, and I'm just proud of it, right? I was the seed for that in several different states. Now we have it in New Mexico and Arizona and Idaho. So you have a few different places, and we're still expanding out and really trying to help, folks get to their state legislatures. And when I see what Wyoming has done, I'm really proud, because it's growing every year. More folks are engaged, and we get to hear from folks like you. So, Bob, I'll leave you with the chance to say anything else you want to do. I know you've got a hectic schedule in this budget session, and you're just ramming and jamming, and so we'll let you go. But before we do, any other wise words you want to leave us with?
Well, I don't know about any wise words. I said I got a book coming out this year, and their original subtitle was one Wyoming rancher's journey to wisdom and something. And I said, take that wisdom off of there, because the minute you claim you're wise, you're dumber than hell. So, but I would say in a career that spanned over 40 years, the difference in how we do things today and how we did then, and I know you can both relate to this a little bit, is it used to just be, let's go see who can beat the other one down. And now it's, how do we build the other one up? It is different, and it is so much more effective. And I just wish that people that haven't seen that could feel that at times, because I think it would change how we address almost everything we do in this country. And it's a good way to do it.
Awesome. Don't believe all the doom and gloom, right? There's excellent things like this happening, and it's real, and it's doing really cool stuff.
There's great stuff going on everywhere.
Well, Bob, I'm honored, and just thank you. For the work you're doing, for spending time with us, and just any. This is just as good as it gets. This program, let's get this baby funded. If you make it over to Camo at the Capitol next week, make sure you tell your legislators what you think about this. And Bill, I'll give you a chance to sign off. I know I've been talking a lot. Bob and I are Wyoming guys, so we're kind of back and forth here. But sign off there, buddy.
Hey, man, I've got to say, this has probably so far been my favorite podcast we've done together. I have thoroughly enjoyed listening to all of this, because it's so upbeat and so positive. And I mean, I haven't been to Wyoming in 25 years, but I'm buying the book as soon as it comes out, Bob. So make sure and let us know when it's published and when it's available.
Will do.
Great, Bob, to see you, Bill. We're happy to put a link, if you've got it yet, to your book in our show notes, and we'll put one to the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resources Trust Fund. And I'll see you up at Camo at the Capitol next week.
Yeah, and I'll let you know the book's still in production. It should be out later this year, so we'll keep you posted on that. But I appreciate it, and Bill, I hope to see you down there in April.
Let me know. I'll come see you.
All right, man.
All right, gents. Thanks, Bob. Take care.
Have a great day, guys.
See you. For more great content, check out NWF Outdoors social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Connect with us. We want to hear from you. Send us your ideas for podcast guests and questions in the comments.
We are NWF Outdoors.